Shocking new report showing how Apple users' data was stolen and sent to China. The report revealing that Adware Doctor, this is Apple's top paid utility in the Mac App Store, secretly recorded users' data and browsing history before sending it all to a server in China. Now, Apple was notified about the app's flaw a month ago, but only decided to remove it today. Here to talk about all of that and more, cybersecurity expert Morgan Wright. Morgan, what the heck is going on here? This is frightening.
Look, I'm a huge Mac fan. I'll tell you, this is a shock. Apple is normally very good about preventing any kind of malware on their store. In fact, you could probably count on two hands the number of times something is snuck by. But for this is even worse than that. This is an app that masqueraded as another app. All they did to confuse them was change their name, and now data's going back to China. So the real question in China, who's getting it? You know, the Chinese army or some other company?
The real question I have is, why did Apple wait a month before doing anything about it?
You know, stock price, optics, hearings coming up. I have no idea. That responsible disclosure, people discovered it. They should have taken care of it right away. It's easy to push out. It's easy, I say easy to push out an update. They could have got an update done. It could have come out over the phone, been updated, or removed from the store, let people know. But, man, waiting this long doesn't look good.
And you just wonder, I mean, you probably have an idea about this, but how much data could they have collected over the course of a month?
You think about how popular the app was. You think it was the top paid app on the store. You think about what people were doing. I tell you, tons and tons of data, however you measure that, but it's a lot of data.
And frankly, possibly hundreds of millions of people, right?
Absolutely.
Extraordinary. All right, let me switch to the committee hearings that happened this week with the Twitter executives and the Facebook executive. Jack Dorsey, who's actually the founder of Twitter, was there. And while he was talking, his stock went down about 5%. Clearly, he was not reassuring investors that he gets it.
Look, the government hasn't got it right. Facebook admitted they didn't get it right. Jack Dorsey, in his opening statement, didn't say he got it right. I wrote all of this in an op-ed in The Hill. He did say, hey, look, we've got some room to do. That's code for, guys, we didn't get it right. So if nobody can get it right, what hope is there for the midterm election? So there is a lot of sensitivities on people's part about the data, the privacy, the security of their information, and what steps these big companies, by the way, Google, conspicuous by their absence, thumb their nose at the privacy of the American people.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be able to last for long. They're going to have to address it at some point. But there's also the question of the bias.
Yes.
And you notice it particularly with Twitter, where a whole bunch of people, including dignitaries, folks like Congressman Jim Jordan and others have been shadow banned, where you have people who've been banned for life now, without going into details. This is Soviet talk to say you are banned for life. I understand this is not a government. This is a private company. They can do what they want. But at the same time, it shows a contempt for the idea of freedom of thought and freedom of speech.
Well, look, they've got some other issues, too. There is bias, and people think, well, we're going to use artificial intelligence. You got to remember, at the end of the day, the algorithms that are used by artificial intelligence are written by who? By people. So if there's bias in the algorithm, there will be bias in the outcome. And you're right. These companies aren't just public or private companies. They're publicly traded companies using money and taxpayer loopholes that they've benefited from, going over facilities that have been paid for on the back of the American people. The Internet, is an invention of the DARPA and the Defense Department. A lot of this stuff has been paid for by American taxpayer money. So I think citizens want some equity here to say, what about my data? What about my privacy? And I want equal access. These guys were all big about net neutrality. Well, what about subscriber neutrality? What about, personality neutrality? If they want it neutral, they got to play both sides of it equally well.
By the way, you mentioned tax loopholes. There are a lot of loopholes that they took advantage of. I mean, they're there. A lot of other companies are taking advantage of them, right?
Yeah, I'm not an economist by training, but I do know that if you want some compliance, you start changing the tax laws. Remember, Al Capone went to jail for tax evasion, not murder. So if you want to get their attention, change the tax laws, make the fines bigger, and you'll start seeing things like the shadow banning and things like that probably start to go away.
Well, you do want to get their attention, particularly since Google didn't even show up for this meeting. But I don't want government regulation of speech on the Internet. I do not want that because, it may be fine for one term, but another presidency you may not like. I mean, it gets into a whole bunch of issues that run counter to our Constitution. And the president has said he doesn't want regulation of the internet, but how do you get their attention? One way is to get into the tax loopholes. Are there any other way that they can be forced to do the right thing?
Look, all you have to do is look to the European Union, the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations. Those are probably the most far-reaching, consumer-friendly regulations that are out there. They actually have a consumer, basically a user bill of rights that we don't even have here in the U.S. But the other thing the EU did, too, is they say, look, you've got 1 hour now to start taking extremist content off, or we may start considering regulations. Right now, there are suggestions and their guidelines. Yeah. So this is the shot across the bow. So I think we've got to start putting a few shots. Look, I agree with you. I don't want them to regulate speech, but I do want the equality of access to these platforms and stuff. And defining hatred is a very tough thing, I agree. But this is a slippery slope to start to have them be the only sole arbiter of what kind of speech is protected on the internet.
Well, they were shadow banning Jim Jordan because they call some of what he says, which I think is perfectly legitimate. They were calling that hate speech, or at least some of their algorithms were churning up the hate speech thing. So that's
Diamond and Silk were banned. I mean, please.
Yeah, it's got to change. Morgan Wright, good to see you, my friend. Thank you very much.